Welcome to Midas Touch, Legal AF with Court Accountability Action. I'm Evan Vorpahl, and I'm here with David Armiak, Research Director of the Center for Media and Democracy and investigative journalist. David, welcome, and thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So in November, there were some high-profile and consequential elections, including state Supreme Court contests in Pennsylvania, high-profile gubernatorial contests in New Jersey and Virginia, and notably a very expensive attorney general race in Virginia between Jay Jones and Jason Miyares. That race was awash with out-of-state dark money. This is part of a broader trend of more money than ever being pumped into state elections. David, I'm curious, in your opinion, why did this race in particular see so much national attention and spending?
Yeah. Again, thanks for having us here today. This race in particular was very important to Republicans and the right wing across the board. Mainly because it was the first major race that was contested following Trump's election and Trump coming into office. By contested, I mean, the polling showed that it was close coming, up to election day. There were other races, of course, for lieutenant governor and governor, but those were seen to be, pretty heavily favored for the Dems and turned out that way. But this race in particular was very close, and so attracted, tens of millions of dollars. I don't have the final figure at hand, but a group that we follow closely, the Republican Attorneys General Association, spent at least $8.5 million supporting the incumbent Jason Miyares, and that it does not include money that it also worked or sent to the Republican state leadership. Or worked with. Sorry, I apologize. Let me back up. That money does not include a seven-figure campaign that RAGA, or the Republican Attorneys General Association, worked together with the Republican State Leadership Committee PAC to help Governor Glenn Youngkin's Secure Your Vote initiative in Virginia to get out the vote.
Sure, yeah, and from what I've seen in reporting, that the AG race, there was more money spent on that race than the gubernatorial election, which is pretty notable. From what I've seen, to that Youngkin Spirit of Virginia PAC, which was running this Get Out the Vote campaign, that PAC itself was funded by out-of-state billionaires, including Jeff Yass and Thomas Petterfy. David, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the Republican Attorneys General Association, though. What is RAGA and who's behind it?
Sure. Before I get to that, can I back up and talk a little bit about Miyares and why he's important to the Republican Party?
Yeah, of course.
Miyares is an individual who was seen as an up and comer in Virginia. Whether you believe this or not, somewhat of a moderate, younger, fairly good looking guy who, even as early as 2022 was a headlining speaker at the Heritage Foundation's Resource Bank meeting. And many people had said that they thought that he was on track to run for U.S. Senate in the future. And with Virginia being, a kind of purple state in recent elections, this was very important to them to try to hold on to Miyares and ensure that he would continue to win. Another reason it was really, Miyares was very important is as somebody that could defend Trump's policies in the state and to prevent challenges to Trump's policies from Virginia, which hosts, or is home to a whole swath of federal workers, right? Many of which at the time had been laid off, likely illegally. So the Dems, wanted somebody that would fight, for federal workers, and the Republicans were, thinking the other way. I think that this is a really important development, and really, I'm not sure, what's going to happen with Miyares and the rest of his career.
Sure. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit too about, why these attorney general seats are so important. Why are they such big targets?
Well, attorney generals, right, serve as like the top law enforcement officer in the state. Yeah. they're the ones that jump on to amicus briefs, at the Supreme Court, or supporting. For your listeners that might not be familiar with this term, there's kind of like supporting research memos to the Supreme Court, offering opinions before the Supreme Court decides things. They also protect consumers in states or protect workers, right? Or they sue against what they see to be unjust actions from the federal government, or unjust actions of corporations. Both sides of the aisle are after these positions, and spend a whole lot of money these days, both getting them elected and on their own pay-to-play groups. On the Dem side, they have the Democratic, Attorneys General Association, and on the Republican side, the Republican Attorneys General Association. And both of them rake in a whole lot of money from corporations and wealthy interests.
Sure. Yeah. And, we've both done a lot of work around, Leonard Leo, the Republican Attorneys General Association. So I guess I'll circle back there too about, could you talk a little bit more about what the Republican Attorneys General Association is, who funds it? Why are they targeting these seats? Why is there so much money being pumped in through RAGA to capture these seats? And what's its agenda?
Yeah, so the Republican Attorneys General Association is a pay-to-play group that basically matches corporations or corporate lobbyists and right-wing operatives with attorneys general's offices across the country. They have a couple C3s or educational nonprofits that are part of that network, the Center for Law and Policy, and the Rule of Law Defense Fund, which is a C4. They also have an action or a PAC, right? Which, you were talking about, supports attorney general candidates for office. They for many years, they've been heavily funded by the fossil fuel industry, the pharmaceutical industry. So Koch Industries for many, many years was the top donor, for example, in the big petrochemical company, which, has, Charles Koch and his late brother David have spent, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars building a political ecosystem that rivals, both the Republican and Democratic Party. But more recently, right, Leonard Leo and his network, through the funding vehicle Concord Fund, have been huge donors to RAGA, and not only donors, but have also been contractors. So getting $7,500 per month. This changed recently. We took a look at the last filing over the summer, which covered with the FEC or with the IRS, that covered January through June. And there was no money from Leonard Leo's Concord Fund, and it appears that the Concord or the contract with Leonard Leo's COC advisors had also been terminated. Really, calling into question what the relationship is, if any, between the Republican Attorneys General Association and Leonard Leo and his crew at the moment.
Yeah, well, I find that particularly interesting because, like you said, Leo's Concord Fund has been, the primary vehicle bankrolling these Republican AGs, bankrolling RAGA. And yeah, I find it very notable that funding tap seems to have turned off or shifted. And yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to sort of this, is that related to this potential conflict between Trump and Leo, or where that money is being invested? Because I'm sure Leonard Leo is not stepping away from these attorney general races.
Yeah, it's all of this is really quite interesting. So, Trump was elected, and shortly after that, we learned that Peter Bisbee, who had been leading RAGA for a few years since the insurrection, and who previously before that was a lieutenant in the Leo network, arguably still is, working at the Federalist Society as its director of state courts and deputy director of external relations with the Federalist Society, left. And shortly after established two groups, First Principles Foundation and First Principles Action. And So that itself was pretty interesting to see, but just sort of observing that, it was unclear, what exactly what was happening. But then in February of this year, Adam Piper, who had been the head of RAGA before Bisbee, up into the insurrection, and those listeners or viewers who might recall this, Piper at the time, was adamant that RAGA and Rule of Law Defense Fund had played no role in the insurrection, despite there being a lot of evidence of such. And once that continued to come out, had resigned. But anyways, he comes back here in February to take office, right, and lead the group again. So you have, Bisbee leaving. In addition, I mentioned about the nonprofits, right? Rule of Law Defense Fund and Center for Law and Policy. Well, its president, David Johnson, it turns out that he ended up leaving as well. And Johnson was also general counsel and policy director in RAGA. And Johnson went to the right-wing law firm Holtzman Vogel, which has close ties to the Leonard Leo network. What all this means in the end, a lot of it's still unfolding, and when we get the next filing from RAGA, it might provide us more insight. But there certainly seems to be this split, and Trump had called Leonard Leo a sleazeball or sleazebag, right? So you have that as well, and he's not very happy about Leonard Leo and Charles Koch funding the New Civil Liberties Alliance to challenge his emergency tariffs. So there's certainly some sort of split. What it means and how long term it is remains to be seen.
Yeah, and like you said, the development of this new First Principles PAC, I find very interesting as well, because it does seem to be like this source of funding that was going into RAGA is shifting into another group that's still focused on state judiciaries. This group had bankrolled heavily a Republican Attorney General candidate in Alabama. It ran ads in Wisconsin's historic state Supreme Court election. And it seems like they're kind of laying the groundwork to potentially play a role to win in these elections next year. But yeah, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, sort of RAGA's role in like cozying up to, Trump and MAGA world. And we know that the Rule of Law Defense Fund, RAGA's C4, ran robocalls ahead of the January 6th insurrection, urging conservatives to march on DC ahead of at the event ahead of the violent insurrection. I was wondering if what other evidence of RAGA working with the Trump administration have you uncovered and at CMD?
Yeah, so part of my work at CMD as a research director and investigative journalist is filing hundreds of records requests each year, and many of them are with Attorney General's office to try to uncover and learn more about their relationship with wealthy interests or the Trump administration or pay-to-play groups like RAGA. But some of the stuff was public, right? Obviously we all know, Trump chose Pam Bondi to be his Attorney General. She, was AG in Florida from, between 2011 and 2019, and was actually chair of the executive committee of RAGA for 2 years in 2014-15. More recently, Andrew Bailey, the Missouri Attorney General, also a Republican and former RAGA member, stepped down from his position on September 8th to serve as a deputy director of the FBI. So we know, they've been picking AGs to serve within the administration. But we've also seen former AGs and former RAGA members doing other things to support Trump, like the Republican governors that were all former AGs, Jeff Landry in Louisiana, Mike DeWine in Ohio, Henry McMaster in South Carolina, and Patrick Morrissey in West Virginia. They all sent hundreds of National Guard troops to D.C. To help with Trump's takeover of the city there. Which ended up in people picking up trash and making the most beautiful grass or growing the most beautiful grass that Trump knows how to grow or whatever he said.
Classic fashion, yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, they were very supportive of that, right? A bunch of these AGs that are RAGA members currently went to the border with Trump's border czar to show solidarity there, right?
Yeah.
We had Landry, I mentioned before, who's now the governor in Louisiana, and was a very active member of RAGA. He, had offered up the Department of Homeland Security its Angola prison, dubbed Louisiana Lockup, to hold ICE detainees. So these are things that we've seen like in the media, but there's things that we've gained, through records requests. At the winter meeting in 2025 of RAGA, Brenna Bird, the AG in Iowa, and Raul Labrador from Idaho participated in a panel on working with the Trump administration. There is and this is really interesting and a development that I hadn't seen, in many years of filing records requests with attorney generals. But it looks like, from an email we obtained, that Pam Bondi has set up a state attorneys general task force to work with her and the DOJ to, quote, focus on addressing different criminal and civil issues via state statutes and regulation in concert with enforcing federal codes, whatever that means. But there's actually some sort of task force, and I'm guessing it's going to be Republican dominated, and Dems aren't invited to that. But I've looked online for any evidence of this, and there's nothing there. We also know that Alan Wilson, the South Carolina Attorney General and RAGA's 2025 Vice Chairman, has been updating the White House on state AG investigations into Act Blue, which is the Democratic Party's main fundraising platform. Sure. In one email says they're discussing, quote, the best ways we can all work together, end quote. Your readers and listeners might know that the House Judiciary Committee has been doing an investigation, right, at the same time that some of the state AGs have. There's another text message we got that was really fun. I would love to point out as well, where, and this came from Chris Kobach's office, who's the Kansas AG and currently the national chair there. But the text message, basically, and this is from March, 28th of this year. But the White House asked for assistance in its retribution campaign, against the law firms Covington and Burling and Perkins Cole. This was a text message from Adam Piper, who, is now leading RAGA. And he says, Alex Mayer, who's a attorney in the White House, just called from the White House looking for an AG to lead on this front, akin to what the AGs have done with proxy advisors. When he was referring to proxy advisors, this is the campaign that the Republican attorneys general, along with a bunch of other right-wing anti-woke capitalism groups, were doing to sort of influence the proxy voting process. So the evidence is there that they are working very closely together. One of the kind of crazy things when I was looking at that visit to the border that the Republican attorneys took, and there was actually a platform with RAGA in front, and many of the AGs, gave remarks. And Kobach, he actually called state AGs in that presser, which is on YouTube, a quote force multiplier for ICE, and emphasize that AGs will, quote, do whatever it takes to restore the rule of law, quote, end quote, when it comes to immigration. So, they're very much working hand in glove here, which I would argue is against, many of our interests here in the country and a big threat to democracy. Yeah, wow.
I mean, it really just sounds like RAGA is cozying up to the Trump administration in a way that, we haven't seen before. And I don't want to mention too, but part of RAGA's agenda that they've been, undergoing since before Trump too, is these attorneys generals have engaged in a relentless, coordinated, years-long effort to destroy the Voting Rights Act. And they pose a massive threat to our democracy. I think a number of these AGs actually backed, Trump's claims of immunity. It is really just alarming, the weaponization of these offices and just how close they are getting to Trump. I wonder, looking forward in 2026, where do you think this is all headed? Are you watching any races in 2026? Are you watching this space at all? what are you thinking about with RAGA and Leo, as they're in conflict, but, they're still largely aligned on this broader agenda. I just want to know, what are you looking at for next year?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'll be looking to see, what happens, in the long term with, this relationship with Leonard Leo and his funding vehicles. So when that next filing comes out next year, I'll be digging through that to see, if the relationship has been rekindled or if not. What does that, what will that look like, as filings come in for, these new Peter Bisbee groups, which we may see, taking a greater role. You mentioned the Alabama race. We've seen at least 1.1 million. It might be more than that at this point. And that's very unusual itself, right? To have, a Republican group, sort of choosing a Republican candidate in the primary. Oftentimes these groups in the past would wait until after the primary, to get involved. So it does sort of suggest or indicate at least, right, that there's some sort of division in some of these places between, Trump MAGA candidates and more, for lack of a better term, more to like sort of traditional Republicans or Bush Reagan Republicans. So what will happen, in those types of races, and I think it won't. That sort of trend is not limited to AG races, but has been seen in other races as well, right? Also interested to see who the top donors are. For RAGA and how that influences what races they spend on, right? So in this first 6 months of the year, we saw, Altria, the tobacco giant, topping all RAGA contributors with 375,000 in donations. Of course, Altria has been consistently a top funder of the group, but to be the top one, it's been a long time. Republican AGs in turn have gone to bat for Altria in protecting its market from so-called illegal Chinese e-cigarettes, which have been marketed to minors, they claim. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't do enough research into that to comment on that. But it definitely shows pay to play.
Yeah, well, interesting coming from the company that owns Juul and has marketed to minors as well.
Yeah, and like other tobacco companies are not far behind. Reynolds America gave 150,000 over the same period, right? U.S. Chamber Institute for Legal Reform, which is the legal arm of the Chamber of Commerce and also consistently a high spender at RAGA, was the second largest at 250K. Along with Koch Industries and Paul Singer, the famous GOP mega donor and hedge fund guy. So I'll be looking to see that and see how that sort of shapes the RAGA agenda. Paying attention to the primaries and see who wins. In Wisconsin, for example, we have a contested Republican primaries. RAGA going to get involved there. So it should be a pretty interesting year. How about you?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly interested to see where this money comes in, especially from this new Leo group, the First Principles Project. It certainly seems like they're laying the groundwork to run a number of campaigns in these states. And it'll be curious to see if they're on the same page as RAGA, if they're in the same states as RAGA, and how that new group is deployed. A lot of my research also involves state Supreme Courts, and I'm very curious to see how this new Leo group is deployed there, and where they're running ads, where they're coordinating with another group close with RAGA, the Republican State Leadership Committee, which has been a vehicle for Leo cash in these state Supreme Court elections. So yeah, I find that all very interesting, especially looking ahead to see where RAGA is lining up with Trump. Well, yeah, thank you, David. It's been great talking to you. I really appreciate you joining us here. And please, everyone, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.